tomorrow. No Bad Parts is what it's called, from Richard Schwartz. This is on internal family systems. TINSA is a model that I work with a place in Boulder called Boulder Recovery, and Beginning Institute Boulder Recovery is the Christian one. Dr. Barta is the one who started it. TINSA, Trauma-Induced Sexual Addiction. Fantastic book. Julie Slattery is the go-to. She is unbelievable on anything sexual, sexuality related for marriage and such. Rethinking Sexuality is one of the best books that I have read personally, and that's of any book. And Holy Sexuality in the Gospel, this is Christopher Yuan. Fantastic. Those are going to be on here. I'll put them over there for anybody who wants to flip through them. These are my personal copies, so please don't be too rough. I have further resources for anybody who's interested. This is obviously for more sex addiction stuff, but you might find some good stuff on those. And then for each of these, a QR code. Did anybody try these? QR code? Did it work? Sweet. Okay. Sometimes the QR codes stop. They stop working all of a sudden. I tried to choose ones that wouldn't. And so these have some for kids, good pictures, bad pictures, your brain on porn is really good. For each of these, Holy Sexuality and Rethinking Sexuality, my top three are on this. Opens really, really good. Every Man's Battle, every Young Man's Battle, every Young Woman's Battle from Arterburn. I was going to say another three, it's a woman one. And Stoker are really good. And then Touchy Subjects for Kids. Closing the Window from Tim Chester, Setting Us Free. I have a bunch of other books. The TINSA and the No Bad Parts are not on there. So you're more than welcome to look through them. These are very, very good resources. I'm not going to say that everything is perfect in every single one of them, because I will get hate mail that, hey, this book says this. I'm not condoning everything. I'm condoning mostly. Those are really, really good books. Okay. Are any of those from Church of Christ Christians? No. There's nobody. Hardly anybody. Maybe one. She's going to find me one, which would be fantastic. And I'm trying to change that as well. So got a book coming out later this year on some of the stuff. So that's what we got so far. Feel free to look through those, and hopefully that'll help. Again, that's from my porn addiction seminar, 5-part seminar is what those are for. But there's a lot of good stuff, and that'll get you to the right place with some good resources. Okay, we're going to jump right in. We just looked at God's design for sexuality. Tomorrow we're going to get into having a better understanding of sex. Part 3. This is part 1 and 2. The second part tomorrow is part 3 of the series, so to speak, which is understanding sex, what it's all about. So before we can get a robust sexual theology, though, we have to get a better hold of what drives sex, which is emotions. And so we looked at this intimacy pyramid, and as we saw with this, emotion plays a pivotal role. It's not the foundation, but it plays a pivotal role of who we are and what's important to us, right? And so we looked a little bit at the spiritual in this last one. We'll look more at the spiritual. We're going to get into the intellectual. We're going to get into the physical and actually fixing some of the issues of sex. Right now, we're here. We really need to understand the emotional aspects of sexuality. I think it affects our relationship with the physical, with the sexual parts of us. And this world spends so much time focusing on the physical and on the sexual and its physical feelings, they neglect the deeper parts of human sexuality. They never really get to the bottom ones. They pretend like you can have sex with whoever you want, wherever you want, whenever you want, and have no emotional baggage, as though this happens in a vacuum, right? They pretend like you can look at porn, you can self-pleasure for hours a day without it having a massive effect on your self-esteem and on your social anxiety. You got a bunch of 25-year-old guys that can't look people in the eyes. Wonder why, right? There's serious emotional and social anxiety. They pretend like you can switch between being a boy and being a girl and not experience any emotional confusion and pain, other than that which is caused by bullying, right? Well, they're suicidal because of all the bullies. Maybe part of that is true, but most of these struggled with mental health issues and emotional issues long before they ever chose that path. So most of the time, this is an ongoing issue. The world treats sex as though again, it takes place in this physical vacuum where it has no effect on your thoughts, it has no effect on your emotions. And the sad thing is, this violates everything we know from a mental health perspective. We often use the cognitive triangle, is what we talk about in therapy. And the cognitive triangle is that thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are all connected. Your thoughts lead to your feelings lead to your behaviors. And you say, well, why am I behaving this way, right? Why am I acting out sexually? Well, it goes backward. Your behaviors go back to your feelings. We ask why. Why am I behaving this way? Well, because I feel this way. Why do I feel this way? Because I think this way. Why do I think this way? Typically, I'd say that it goes back to emotion-drenched memories. You think about trauma. If I get scared of people because I was beat by my, by my dad or somebody, if on a hypothetical level, if that's the case, and I am now scared of most people, and I say I'm not safe, that's the thought. It leads to feelings of anxiety. It leads to feelings of maybe shame, of hurt, of all sorts of things, and it leads to a behavior where I'm antisocial and I don't do anything with anybody, and so I stay on my own. Well, that's coming from an emotion-drenched memory, right? We know in the psychological world, this is true. This has been taught in trainings I've been a part of. Like, the world knows this. We don't live this out when it comes to sexuality, interestingly enough. We want to act like the behavior is isolated, and it really doesn't have much to do with anything else. Or maybe there's a thought and we cut straight to the chase, we go right to the behavior. We're missing the fact that sexual behaviors have a huge part, or the feelings have a huge part to play in our sexual behaviors. It's not isolated, it's not in a vacuum. So the reality is our sexuality is tied very close to our emotions, and more specifically, I think our emotional wounds. I think it's fair to say everyone in this room has been hurt emotionally at some point in their life, and they've been left to deal with it, right? Whether it be through poor attachment with your parents, being hurt from peers or from friends, having emotional pain from previous or current relationship, everyone at some point will have to deal with emotional wounds. And so you might be asking, hold on, with your parents, what does my relationship with my dad have to do with my sexuality? Right? Come on. The answer is basically everything. So in this second session, I want to look at how our emotional wounds affect us, especially sexually, and how we might begin to heal these wounds. And in the third session, we're going to get into it. Because when we have a better grasp on our emotional states, then we can begin to better establish a better sexual theology up here. Until we heal this, there's no point in me talking to you here. I talk to clients all the time. I talk to addicts, right? I specialize in sex addiction. So I talk to my porn addict clients. They've tried everything behaviorally and psychologically to quit. They've done the accountability partners. They've read the books. They've taken the online courses. They've set up blocking softwares. They've taken the cold showers. They put on the rubber band to snap on their wrist every time they're tempted. They've done all of the tricks that are supposed to work. They're still addicted. Why? How could it be that they're still addicted? They have a 1,000% correct sexual theology in their minds. I know porn's bad. I know that's not what God wants for me. I know that I need to pursue more, and so I shouldn't be here. That's fantastic. Then why isn't it connecting? Why aren't you out of it? Because this is not everything. So before we build this tomorrow with understanding sex, I want to work on this. I've worked with men and women both who have committed adultery. They tell me about their typical marital issues, the occasional fight, right? Maybe it's a knockdown, drag-out fight. 3 weeks long stretch without sex. Maybe it's a 3-month long, but they can't really figure out why they acted out other than, I guess I just fell out of love with my spouse, right? I guess I just stopped loving him. And so I wanted, or it felt really good to be loved by somebody else, right? But they read the marriage books. They listened to the podcasts on how to fix their marriage. They knew adultery was wrong. They did it anyway. Why? It's because there's a disconnect between the brain and the heart. They logically know it, but they don't know it. Deep down, know it, feel it, believe it. In Greek, there are two different words. There's oida and gnosko for knowledge. Oida is this. Gnosko means I've experienced it. I can know what it's like to walk a mile. I can read a book about it. I can tell you all about maybe the different weather conditions that make it difficult, the best shoes to put on to walk that mile, the best place to do it if it's uphill, downhill. I could recite everything. If I have not walked the mile, I don't really know what it's like to walk a mile, do I? Well, gnosko is, yeah, I've walked it. I know it, right? That's what we're talking about, is we can build this, and you can come to this seminar and I can tell you everything up here. It's not going to change a single thing if you're still hurting in here. That's why we have to heal the emotional wounds. I often illustrate it like this. Take Bill here. Bill's a great guy, right? But you know what? He's struggling in his sexual acting out. He's struggling with his sex life, with his spouse, and maybe he's acting out in the wrong way. Maybe he's looking at porn, maybe he's doing whatever else, right? And so he knows sexual acting out is wrong, and he's trying to send it to the heart, saying, hey, can you pay attention to this? But there's just something there, right, that's blocking it. And his heart's saying, I need to act out sexually. I really need that. And so there's this giant disconnect between what he knows and what he feels, right? And so we say, what is this in the neck? This is often how I illustrate it. It's like you have this metal thing that's inserted and it goes, boop, and it just bounces right back up to the top. I know what I need to be doing. And okay, what's the problem? You have trauma, or you have emotional hurt that's keeping you from feeling what you know. The worst part is, we often come along, we browbeat these people, we give them more books to read, we try to shame them out of their behavior, we help them see the consequences of their actions, we tell them, hey, fix this, fix this, fix this, fix this. They have fixed that. That's not the problem. The brain is not the issue. The brain's the one saying, man, it's wrong. I know it's wrong. I know I need to get out of this. Then why aren't they doing it? Because something is keeping them from feeling it. And our usual emphasis is horrible. It's not all wrong to call out sin. It's not wrong to let them know their soul is in jeopardy. But in attempting to rehabilitate someone who has fallen into sexual sin, we try to change either the behaviors or the thoughts. And we rarely dig deep enough to determine the emotional wounds that are causing them to turn sex, to turn to porn, to turn inward, right, to themselves. I want to know their trauma. I want to know their emotional wounds that drove them to act out sexually. So when somebody acts out sexually, I don't go, well, let me just tell you what you need to do. Here, there's this great book. Read that. You have to do it, right? Well, if you're not doing it, why aren't you doing it? Because there's some reason why you're not. This is kind of, again, therapy 101, and we can't just focus on this, which is why I think behavioral therapy really doesn't work that much. And I'm even getting away some from the cognitive behavioral, strict cognitive behavioral, just because I think sometimes it doesn't deal with the emotional wounds. It doesn't heal the heart. So I stated the goal for this session was to help us understand and to begin to heal our emotional wounds. And to do so, I'm going to break it into 3 separate sections. We're going to look at the first one today, and then we'll get into the other 2 tomorrow. I want to look at attachment, identity, and internal family, which again is what that no bad parts is about, the internal family system inside of us, and how each of those has a potential to play a very pivotal role in our sexuality and in who we are as people. And so if these don't affect you sexually, if good for you, truly, that's fantastic, but I guarantee you they affect you in some way, some other way. So hopefully this connects for everybody. Say, I don't have sexual trauma, I don't have sexual issues. That's fantastic. Hopefully enjoy the ride as we step into attachment and the world of attachment. So as we get into this, John Bowlby is the guy, I think back in the 60s, that began or really explored the idea and created the idea of attachment theory. So in classic attachment theory, and I go off of it some therapists use this strictly, I'm not one of those that uses it strictly, but in classic attachment theory, Bowlby described attachment as a lasting psychological connectedness between human beings. A lasting psychological connectedness between human beings. You know what that sounds like? It sounds like intimacy, right? Exactly what we discussed. A lasting psychological connection. Now, I think it's on the other things as well, the deeper levels, but between human beings. So why are we discussing attachment theory? Because it has everything to do with what sex is all about, which is a lasting psychological connection, connectedness, and really more than just psychological, a physiological connection as well. Mary Ainsworth, she comes along, she adds to the theory quite a bit a few years after they wrote a book together. In this, and from this, there are 4 classic attachment styles. So this is the therapy class you didn't know you needed. But you have anxious insecure attachment, which is sometimes called anxious ambivalent attachment. And I'm just going to read, I'll be straight up honest, I'm going to read straight from healthline.com. They did a great job of describing how these work, so this is not my own stuff. This is from healthline.com. This type of attachment happens when parents respond to their child's needs sporadically. Care and protection are sometimes there and sometimes not. In anxious, insecure attachment, the child can't rely on their parents to be there when needed. Because of this, the child fails to develop any feelings of security from the attachment figure. And since the child can't rely on their parent to be there if they feel threatened, they won't easily move away from the parent to explore. Anxious, that's why it's anxious and secure, right? They're anxious about stepping out because they're afraid if they come back, the parent won't be there. So they're afraid to step out, right, and to explore the world around them. Second, you have avoidant insecure attachment. Sometimes a parent has trouble accepting and responding sensitively to their child's needs. Instead of comforting the child, the parent minimizes the feelings, rejects the demands, and doesn't help with difficult tasks. And this leads to this avoidant insecure attachment. In addition, the child may be expected to help the parent with their own needs. I deal with this a lot. The child learns that it's best to avoid bringing the parent into the picture. After all, the parent doesn't respond in a helpful manner. In avoidant insecure attachment, the child learns that their best bet is to shut down their feelings and become self-reliant. That's avoidant, insecure. So basically, the parents have no idea how to handle the emotions. Sometimes, and like I'm saying, what I deal with a lot is that the parents' emotions basically are more than the kid's emotions. And so the kid learns basically either don't have emotions or learn to hide the emotions underneath the parents because theirs is what matters, not mine. And then we have avoidant, insecure attachment. Third is disorganized, insecure attachment. In this case, parents show atypical behavior. They reject, ridicule, and frighten their child. Parents who display these behaviors often have a past that includes unresolved trauma. Tragically, when the child approaches the parent, they feel fear and increased anxiety instead of care and protection. Eventually, the child starts to develop behaviors that help them feel somewhat safe. For example, the child may become aggressive toward the parent, refuse care from the parent, simply become super self-reliant on themselves. Right? Super self-reliant. Because if I reach out to my parent, it may hurt me. That is disorganized, insecure attachment. And finally, you have secure attachment, which nobody knows what that looks like, so we'll move on. Secure attachment is what you're aiming for. It happens when parents or other caregivers are available, sensitive, responding, and accepting. Okay? Available, sensitive, responding, and accepting. And in relationships with secure attachment, parents let their children go out and about, but they are there for them when they come back for security and comfort. These parents pick up their child, play with them, and reassure them when needed. So the child learns that they can express negative emotions and someone will help them. Children who develop secure attachment learn how to trust and have healthy self-esteem. As adults, these children are in touch with their feelings, are competent, and generally have successful relationships. Well, now you know. Why is this important? Why does this matter at all? Why am I going into attachment? Well, each of these has the ability to affect your marriage and your sex life. Are you clingy in your marriage? Are you constantly afraid of letting your spouse out of your sight lest they commit adultery? Do you freak out when they aren't near? You most likely struggle with anxious, insecure attachment. Do you struggle being open and honest with your feelings in your marriage? Do you struggle to open up yourself sexually to your spouse because you don't feel worthy of being loved? Do you downplay your own wants and desires and emotions and then end up frustrated in the bedroom? You most likely struggle with anxious or avoidant, insecure. Do you struggle with sex addiction? Do you struggle to be a partner in your marriage instead of treating it as two individuals? Do you find yourself lashing out in anger, scaring your spouse, making sex very difficult for you and more of a chore for your spouse? You most likely struggle with disorganized, insecure attachment. This is what we look at as we discuss people's sexual needs, sexual desires, sexual perversions. As we initially go back, and I don't even use classic attachment that much, you can start to see how this might actually affect the way that we deal with other people. Not just other people, specifically our spouse, who in a lot of ways mimics our parents depending on how we handle it, right? Who we choose. We either choose the opposite of our parents or the exact same as our parents. Rarely do we choose somebody who is a mixture. Most of the time they are one or the other. So in classic attachment theory, the type of attachment is developed between 2 years old, or between birth and 2. I believe attachment, to be honest, comes in probably the first 10 years, maybe even more. I don't think just in the first 2 years of you reaching for your mom and not. I think the dad plays a key role in this as well. The dad doesn't really play a role for the first 2 years of the kid's life. Not that much. It's mainly the kid and the mom. That definitely plays a role for attachment theory, but I think it's even more so. I've worked with kids that even in their teens, things their dad said, the attachment wounds that it created a lot of issues. So it's not just 2 years old, and you may hear that. One of the things that we utilize quite a bit is called hot box, cold box. This is how we explain sex addiction to our clients and to my clients is this hot box, cold box. And in the hot box, you have a parent who's very abusive. You go to them for help, and what you get in return is abuse, whether that be verbal, hopefully not sexual, but verbal, sexual, physical abuse, mental abuse, right, emotional abuse. So you're very abused. You can't, kind of looks like he's got a chef's hat on there. That's not what that is. He's very angry, right, in this hot box. And what you learn as a kid is, I'm bad. There's something wrong with me. I reached out to my parent. I got abuse in return. There must be something wrong with me. And on the other hand, you have the cold box, and you got the guy who's just looking at his phone. He doesn't care, right? He's neglectful. Parents who are neglectful. The kid reaches out for support. The kid reaches out for his needs, his emotional needs. And what does he get in return? A parent who's like, huh? Oh, I'm sorry. What'd you say? Right? There's a neglect there. They don't care about what the kid has to deal with. And what do you learn from that? Well, you learn I must not matter, and I'm not worthy of love. Clearly, I'm not worthy of love, because if I was, my parent would respond to me. And if I wasn't bad, my parent wouldn't beat me, right? There must be something wrong with me because I can't figure out why the guy who's supposed to protect me, why the woman who's supposed to care for me would do this. And so we handle these things, or these are the core beliefs that we end up taking away from these things. And then when we reach out for love, we get pushed back and we say, I guess I must take care of myself. And in the other one, we reach out for love and we don't get it and we say, I guess I must take care of myself. And in this way, we are creating emotional wounds that when we take them into the marriage, I've been caring for myself for forever. How in the world am I supposed to open up to somebody? You know, the last time I opened up to somebody emotionally, they turned their back on me. You know, the last time I opened myself up emotionally, they abused me. What we deal with, again, in the realm of sex addiction, but I think this also takes place, is, interestingly, you often take the role of the abuser and your spouse takes the role of the child. So you become the one that if you were neglected, you neglect your spouse. If you are the one who's abused, verbally abused, whatever it is, you end up doing the same to your spouse. You verbally abuse them, and they become that sheltered kid in the corner. The kid who can't find love. And now the spouse starts to get what we call gaslighting, which is there's something wrong with me, right? Or, well, I can't get my spouse to love me, I must not be worthy of love. This has everything to do with our sex lives, and our sexuality. True attachment is when you are valued, accepted, and loved. Your emotions matter, your thoughts matter, you matter. In your marriage, you matter. Many people, they don't get this from their parents, and there are many ways of handling this, but most people just choose to forgive and forget. Instead of recognizing, going through the proper attachment and recognizing I'm worthy of love and I matter in this relationship. That's what it ought to look like. And when they don't, again, they forgive and forget. Well, you know, past is past. What am I supposed to do? It is what it is. I can't go back. My parents certainly not going to apologize. You see them in the last picture, or they were abusing me. Why in the world would I go get their apology? So I must have to just forgive and forget. Have I really forgiven? No. Have I really forgotten? No, that's impossible. So I'm going to pretend like I have, push it into a closet, act like it doesn't exist, and then when I spill it all over my wife, or spill it all over my spouse, my husband, well, you know, sorry, I'm so sorry. I promise that won't happen again. I promise that won't happen again. Shove it in the closet, close the door, and then your wife comes along, triggers it, opens the door. It all spills out, and you go, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to call you those things. I didn't mean to say that. I didn't mean to do that. And meanwhile, your relationship, your sexual relationship, your emotional connection to your spouse is in rapid decline, because every time your spouse comes along and opens the door to that closet that you've been shoving everything in, it all comes out all over them. Well, maybe we need to deal with that. Why don't we deal with it? Because opening that door hurts. It's not fun. Everything behind that door is everything we've been trying to hide for years. The emotional wounds, the emotional connections, or disconnections rather, that we receive from our parents, we receive from other people, the negative core beliefs that we now believe about ourselves. That's what we have tried desperately to hide behind that door. Our wife, our husband, whatever it is, our spouse triggers it. We come unglued, or we avoid. We decide everything that came out of there we neglect and we avoid, and they're left to deal with that as well. We have to do is true attachment, but again, there's a danger in quickly forgiving your parents or whoever it was that created the attachment wounds. There's a major danger here that doesn't really get discussed. A lot of times, like, well, it's godly to forgive, so just forgive. Well, let's see. God doesn't forgive me and send me to heaven if I don't ask for forgiveness and repent. I don't think my parents did, or whatever it may be, right? So do I just go ahead and forgive all the attachment wounds? Eventually, yes, but if you forgive too soon, there's a reason why that doesn't help. And as we go along the timeline, of course, this is the timeline of your life. You have your separate ages, your infancy, your childhood, right? You're a man, you're an aging man, and then we go off into the sunset. This is kind of the timeline of our life, right? So let's say you're currently 40 years old. I put that at halfway. Let's hope you're 40 right here and you can live 90 or something cool. Good for you. But I put it halfway, right? Midlife. Let's say you're 40. When you were 6, you vividly remember being physically abused by your dad. Maybe it happened multiple times, right? But time at 6 really stands out emotionally. It may not have been your dad. It may have been somebody else, right? It may have been a friend or an uncle or whatever it may have been. You were badly abused at that age. So you're 6 years old. Well, you were supposed to get safety, love, and affection from your father, from your friend, from your uncle, whoever it was. And instead, what'd you get? You got abused. You weren't supposed to get physically abused. So what do we do in a situation like this? what we do in therapy is called reparenting. We take your present self, we insert him back into the memory of your younger self, and we provide that safety, we provide that caring, that sense of love. We keep him safe, and we reframe the memory to help you better understand what's going on, to get your 6-year-old self out of that memory. Does it physically change memory? No, but you'd be surprised when you reframe it how much that helps. If the trauma is not dealt with, or if it's forgiven too soon, then you keep your 6-year-old self in that memory. And that 6-year-old self is scared and he's hurt. And he's angry. And you in your 40s are pretending to be great. It's fine. He's great. And so your 6-year-old self looks at your 40-year-old self and he goes, "You're a fraud and I can't trust you. I can't trust you because you're just like the guy who abused me. You're standing here acting like everything's fine and I'm not." And we have a 6-year-old inside of us who is screaming to be helped. He's screaming to be loved. He's screaming for somebody to not hurt him. And you've taken the side of the abuser because you just forgot. You forgave. There's reasons why. The 6-year-old doesn't know those reasons. All he knows is, hold on a second. This guy's supposed to love me and he hurt me. Who cares about reasons right now? Well, he's had a tough life. He was abused by his dad. Who cares? I was 6 and I got beat, right? That's what this kid's saying. And you come along and you say, it's fine. No, it's not fine. It's not fine. He has to know you care about him. He has to know that he is worthy of love. You saw that hot box. I'm unworthy of love. I'm bad. He's got to know you're not bad. You're worthy of love. You're cared for. We can't just let him forgive and forget. We can forgive after we get past the fact that he has not forgotten. We work through some of those emotions and we help him feel safe. And then we can provide the healing that takes place to say, you're right, Dad wasn't a bad spot. He was not who I needed him to be in that moment. But that's after I've already worked through the emotional trauma that got us there. We cannot leave that 6-year-old stranded in the trauma. And coincidentally, all trauma works this way to a degree. What you experience as a child still plays a massive role going forward if it's not processed. Let's say you're molested at 7. Maybe you didn't tell anybody about it because it felt dirty. Now you have it ingrained in your mind, sex is dirty. It's not what we do, right? It's something done to you and not with you. It's something you should never talk about, and it's highly shameful. Maybe you internalize that shame, and you believe that what happened is your fault. And maybe this leads you to acting out sexually as an adult, or to repressing anything sexually as a result. Either way, it shows up in your marriage, right? Unresolved trauma. And if unresolved, these things lead to those negative beliefs like, I'm unworthy of love, or something similar, which has a major potential to affect your adult life. So do you struggle to let other people in? Do you struggle being vulnerable with your spouse? Do you struggle viewing sex as a gift instead of a punishment from God? Do you hate sex in the marriage, or do you view it as dirty? Do you want sex every single day from your spouse? It's very possible deeper internal beliefs from your past trauma are at play. So tomorrow we're going to look at what sex represents to you and how that might affect your view of sex, but with the understanding sex and the representations. But as we look at this with the attachment styles, it's important to know how each attachment works. As a male, your relationship with your father mirrors your relationship with yourself. As you head towards your mother, right, that mirrors the relationship with others. So you have a really solid relationship with your father, you probably have a solid relationship with yourself. Did you have a really negative relationship with your mother? You probably have a negative view of others. And vice versa, of course, right? Females to the father and with their mother, it switches. So as we think about this attachment theory, we think about, the things that have hurt in our marriage, the fact that we don't let people in, the fact that we have either a really poor view of ourselves, right, or a really poor view of others, we're really judgmental toward them, or we're really judgmental toward ourselves, we have a lot of shame. This has a major effect, a major role with attachment. So why does all this matter? Why am I first going over attachment? Your parents play a huge role in your perception of life, including your perception of self and others. I cannot tell you how many porn addicts I've worked with who they ran to porn to overcome their emotional wounds left by their parents. The homosexuals that and transgender individuals who have horrible relationships with their parents, they run towards sexuality as a way to cope, but also as a way to reestablish a new self, a new sense of self away from their parents, a new identity, so to speak. A lot of couples are sexually frustrated because of feelings of self-loathing, of shame. The spouse has tried everything to help, but you cannot accept love if you don't know how to love yourself. If you're so busy saying, I'm unworthy of love, and your spouse pours love into you and you go, yeah, thanks, it's great. I don't feel it. That's a problem. It's a problem. That's why we have to deal with the attachment wounds that has created. Because you realize through attachment issues and through trauma, I'm unworthy of love. What difference does it make if you say, who are you to tell me I'm worthy of love? I know I'm not. I was molested when I was 7. That told me I'm unworthy because I was guilty. I shouldn't have done what I did. I shouldn't have been where I was. We internalize those wounds, we bring it into our marriage, and we can't figure out why we're frustrated. We can't figure out why our sex life is horrible. It's because of things like this. This does transition us into our discussion of identity. For time's sake, I'm going to leave time for Q&A. But if you're struggling with your sexuality, if you have a horrible view of sex, of yourself, or of others, what I would say, and again, I'm a therapist, but consider doing some trauma work. We do, so that's reparenting is one of the ways we do it. Guys, kind of twitching, sorry. We also have IFS we're going to get into tomorrow, internal family systems. I do what is called brain spotting. EMDR is the same vein as brain spotting. That can help us work through some of these things. But consider doing some trauma work, I would say. Your sex life may be struggling under the weight of your past trauma. Your life, your marriage in general, may be struggling under the weight of that. Or of your internal negative beliefs formed by your attachment to your parents. Those things do happen. And no, you don't grow out of it because with age, time heals all wounds. That is not true. As I said, I've worked with people into their 70s that are still very much struggling. I worked with a guy in his 70s who had it wasn't beating his dad, just embarrassed him in front of his friends really bad. Disciplined him in an inappropriate way in front of his friends. He was 10. I think the guy's 70. He was 10 when this happened, 60 years ago, 6 decades. We're still seeing the problems today. It still comes through. At the time that his dad did that in front of his friends and embarrassed him, he had no way to save face. And he said, I will never do that again. I will never put myself in a position where I have to save face or where I'm not able to save face. Well, it creates trauma. It creates issues of how he learns to be around and to experience and understand other people. Okay, trying to see if there's anything else before I want to open it up to Q&A. Attachment theory also, it's not some fringe part of psychology. The more we study with attachment, the more we understand attachment, the more we recognize how big this is, how much of a role this plays in our understanding of other people, how we interact with one another, how we choose to love each other, how we choose to talk to one another. The things where we experience or don't experience love, so much of it comes back. So as we say that, then you're going to have, the parents that go, well, Rick, I will always grow. Everybody. The reality is no parent is perfect, and there are probably attachment wounds from every single person here, regardless of how good your parents were. I'm not talking about the worst of the worst. I'm not talking about those, I wasn't beaten, I wasn't this, or the parents are like, I didn't beat him, I didn't do that. What I'm saying is, no, as if your parents, don't beat yourself up. Everybody has attachment wounds. There are ways to help. One of those is obviously the apologies. One of those is to love. One of those is to listen, to accept, to understand those things. The other side of it, though, is it's really difficult. Like a lot of people, I think, look and I go, well, my childhood was pretty normal. Got a guy I'm working with right now. My child was really, really normal until you realize that there was a heavy emphasis on his weight growing up. And he hated himself and thought that I'm too fat. And I got rejected from this girl. And there's this issue that happened with my parents. I'm not going to go into too much specifics, but there's this issue that happened with my parents and this as well. And when you relate that to the fact that he's thinking about his weight and he's thinking about the fact that he's less than, well, the guy's a raging porn addict. These things happen. Was it anything, his parents didn't do anything horrible. It was more of just the hot box wasn't them cussing. The hot box wasn't them beating him. The hot box was just, he was made to feel very, very uncomfortable about his weight from a very young age to the point that he said, man, I don't like who I am. Matter of fact, I hate who I am. And I'm running from that and I'm coping in other ways. Is that the parents' fault? They didn't know. They were trying to help their son be healthier. They were trying to do what they could. It is what it is, right? It's not something that the parents are really going to be, wow, you got to put him in prison. No, it wasn't horrible, but to him it was. And so if I come along as a therapist and I go, get over it, it's fine. Of course not. It wasn't fine to him. He was made to feel less than from a very young age based on his weight. So what do? We go back, and it's not about hating your parents. It's not about, well, I bring up all these wounds, and man, I had a really rosy view of my parents, and now I hate my parents because of what they did. No, the reality is your younger self who dealt with it is really struggling. Your present self is in a very good situation with your parents. Everybody fears that if I take this and I go back to this version of myself and I start dealing through his emotional wounds, it will affect my view of my parents here. What we find is most of the time it doesn't. It actually provides more context, but it heals the younger self here and then brings the present self more relief and comfort. And that 6-year-old is no longer being shoved into the closet like, we don't want you here. Everybody's welcome. My 6-year-old self is welcome. My 13-year-old self is welcome. This happened here, this happened here. Everybody's welcome to share and to know that your emotions matter. It doesn't change the fact that mom and dad really messed up. You're not fooling that 40-year-old. He knows that. He may have locked it away, but he knows that. So it's important to know and to go back and to help him realize it's not about hating your parents. It's about putting responsibility on the appropriate shoulders. It's not even about hating the abuser if you were sexually abused. Most of the time, there's a lot of hate for the rapist. There's a lot of hate for the molester, for the abuser, if it's not internalized. It's not really about going and increasing that sense of hate either. It's once again about placing responsibility on the appropriate shoulders. When you do that, you realize I don't have very much responsibility at all, or I have zero responsibility for being raped. It was not my fault. When you can give that to yourself, it helps you come out of that trauma and start to connect to others because you're not feeling a sense of shame. You're not taking responsibility that's not yours. You're allowing yourself to process and to move on from that and recognize he shares 100%, he bears 100% blame, or my parents share, you don't have to do percentages, but let's say 60% of the blame. And yes, I was a difficult child because of this, but I will accept responsibility here. It's not the blame game. That's not at all what this is about, is the blame game. And that's what you hear from others, like, great, you're just trying to blame your parents for all your problems. No, we're really not. We're trying to say they do affect us. Pretending that we live in a vacuum where it doesn't is ignorant. It does affect us. It's not about blaming them. It's not about hating them. It's not anything about that. It's just making sure that your 6-year-old self feels comfortable and feels okay and isn't internalizing all the shame and all the negative core beliefs. That's what this is about. Not about shifting hate and everything else. And most of the time, that's not what happens. We don't shift hate. Anyway, I think there's a lot of issues related to sex that have everything to do with attachment. Tomorrow, we're going to look more at fixing the heart. Before we fix this, we're going to get into this and our understanding of sex and what we know to be right, but I want you to know what is right. I want you to know why you're sexual, why you have sexual issues in your marriage, or why maybe somebody turned transgender, or whatever it may be. So often it has something to do with past trauma. I don't know each of you individually, so I'm not going to pretend to know exactly what's going on in your life. All I know is these things do affect. And if this connects with you, I'd love to hear. If I'll be willing to help in whatever way, or just to listen if that's what you need. But yeah, that's going to wrap it up. Let's get into some Q&A. Any questions on that?
I do have a side kind of a question.
Sure.
So how does this affect people with abandonment issues?
So that's cold box to the extreme, right?
Okay.
Fully neglected. Those who are abandoned. And so what you have to do is you go back and you don't abandon, right? In reparenting, you'd go back and you help that young kid realize the abandonment had nothing to do with you. And you help them, basically, you be the adult in their life. That's why we call it reparenting. You're parenting yourself from what your parents could not do for you. So you reparent that position. Again, reparenting is one way to do it. Then if in IFS work, which we'll get into, you say, who's the exile? Who's the one that caused you to be abandoned? This is when people develop addictions based on the emotional hurt, and then they believe that the addict is the reason they were abandoned. It's really kind of messed up in their thinking, and they say, well, I wouldn't be worthy of abandonment if I wasn't. It's like, no, you were an addict because you got abandoned, and you don't want to deal with the hurt. So in that situation, the hurt is actually the exile that's outside the room. We invite the hurt in, we talk to it, we deal with it that way. And then another thing we do, again, is brain spotting, which is just another way to work through the trauma of abandonment. But yeah, that's emotional neglect to the extreme, which most of the time makes us very, very self-reliant, to the point that we don't really trust other people. We don't allow other people in because, well, I couldn't trust them before, I won't trust them again. So we got to work through trust issues and build back who's worthy of trust, and we start with the trust circles and move out. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other questions? Does this all make sense, everybody? Hopefully?
Yes.
Okay.
So one of the things I didn't hear you talk about is that one of the things that can fuel a sex addiction is when there's been extreme grief and loss that has not been encouraged to be processed.
Correct.
A family member of mine lost his father when he was 8 years old. The father didn't even tell the mother that he was terminal until 3 weeks before he died. There was a down day. You know, the day of the funeral was like a down day for everyone, but sunrise the next morning, everyone was expected to get up and be okay and go about their business. And the kids, well, even the mother, there was no grieving. There was no encouragement to grieve. Well, around the age of 9, this little boy got into porn, and it's wrecked his life in many ways. Ever since he's in his 40s now.
Yeah. No, so I've seen that a few times. One of the 7-year-old clients actually lost his younger brother, when he was 3. Kid, I think, died of SIDS. And the family acted like we never talked about it. What happened to my brother? Wouldn't say. Didn't talk when he was 3. And I mean, what do you learn from that? When you think from a family perspective, what do you learn from that? We don't talk about emotions. We don't deal with emotions. We actually push them all aside. We push them away, and we don't want to have anything to do with anything that makes us uncomfortable. Well, now you have a kid who runs from uncomfortable emotions into an addiction that is very comfortable, actually. Had another one. His dad died, disappeared, never heard from him again at 5 years old. So you got some abandonment issues there. You've got the grief, loss. Can I grieve him? Is he going to pop back up? Is he here? I have no idea. He was involved with some really shady people. And so there's a lot having to do with that. And yeah, he ran into, in his sex addiction went from porn into transgenderism and some other things. But that plays a massive role. We're going to get into that tomorrow with internal family, the internal family systems, which is, once again, the exile. And the exile is grief and loss. We don't want to have to deal with them. Matter of fact, I'll pull it up real fast. I'll give you a little hint for tomorrow.
Were those 2 cases older cases?
Yeah, one was in his
generation.
40s, another one was in his 70s now.
So the 70s was when nobody would talk about it.
Well, I think that's why we pretend like sex addiction is a young man's thing, 20, 30 years old, and then they eventually wise up and come out of it. You don't wise up from sex addiction because it's not about here. It's about here. Well, if you don't fix this, then you end up with plenty in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who are still addicted because they never worked on what was in here. And then they went along with it because who talked about emotional wounds back then? Who talked about grief and loss? Nobody. We still don't to this day talk about it that much. Kubler-Ross came along, really helped us understand the 5 stages of grief, which helps. But yeah, that's one of those exiles here is grief and loss. Of those that this is classic IFS here, which that No Bad Parts book is all about. The exile is the one that we don't want in the room. I don't want to feel it, and the family does a really good job of kicking that out and saying, I don't want them here. And so you have this one outside, and what the addict does is he comes along and he basically takes the place of that. And instead of us feeling what we ought to feel, the addict, it kind of pops up in place and helps us. And this isn't just for addiction, this goes into other things, but kind of helps compensate for losing that part of us, if that makes sense. And that's why it's a firefighter, is when the exile acts out, you go into addictions, right? And the firefighter the manager keeps us in control. It is the overachiever, or it's the self-critical, or it's the caretaker. They try to make sure things are in control. The grief loss pops its ugly head up from time to time, knocks on the door, opens the door, go, whoa, 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 whoa. The whole system freaks out. The addiction kicks in, and yeah, that's how we stay in these systems. So until we go back and we grieve that loss, and we let them know it's okay to grieve, and then we help teach them how to grieve, what that is. Our client right now, I feel like a jerk because every session we get together, she's bawling because she's got a lot of grief, but she never was able to handle it because the family just pushed it to the side. Not a sex addict in the least, but just dealing with a lot of that stuff, and there was a lot of shame wrapped around feeling and around going through experiencing the grief and the loss. And so I'm finally letting her experience. and she just bawls every session, but it's really good for her. Crying is really good because it's a body's way of healing. So yeah, I think that's important to know. Good question. Does that answer it?
Yeah.
Okay.
We've got a question about the attachment model that you
Sure.
had. So the attachment model talked a lot about the parent-to-child relationship. What is our understanding of parent-to-parent relationship as it relates to attachment of the child?
Interesting. Now you're getting into Bowen family systems and the triangles, triangulation and such, which is also that's a very interesting. Before I answer that, if you wouldn't mind, expound on that a little bit.
So, just from experience, I hear a lot. I'm a chaplain in the Army, and I deal with a lot of the young folks. And I do counseling, not in a professional way like you do, but I hear about a lot of the issues that young people go through. And one of the things I constantly hear is how the relationship between the mother and father has affected them in their life. Such as not wanting to go into an actual covenantal bond, just cohabitating because of their experience of their parents' relationship was not really a healthy one. So my hunch is there is some effect that the parent-to-parent relationship has on our sense of attachment, and it affects them. I just don't know how much is that relative to parent-to-child.
Well, if you think, that plays a huge role, because if you think about where do we first learn how to relate to others, where do we first learn ethics, where do we first learn all sorts of stuff? I'm convinced one of the biggest days in a kid's life is when he learns his dad is not Superman. Like, it's huge when he realizes my dad is human, my dad has issues. Shouldn't completely destroy him. The earlier you back that up, though, the more trauma there is. That's my theory on it, at least. Is if you find out at the appropriate age of 10, 11, 12 years old, yeah, my dad, yeah, I saw him get mad and that wasn't great type of thing, whatever it may be. If you're 5 and you realize, and I worked with a kid, I think he was 4 or 5, using the getaway car of his dad, doing like a smash and grab, holding up a convenience store. And he's in the getaway car as his dad quickly runs out holding a gun, and it's like, well, what do you do now, right? That doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem accurate. So it's challenging his view of ethics, of what's right and what's wrong. That plays a huge role on attachment, of understanding your relation. That goes to the infinity model, right? Your relation of self, your relation of ego, your relation to ethics and all sorts of stuff. So one of the ways we deal with that, domestic violence is another big one. Of you see your parents do this, and that causes a lot of trauma wounds for kids. Maybe not in classic attachment, though there are ways that does work out, but you still have to process that a lot in therapy, because you're realizing, once again, I'm not safe. They're not safe in their relationship. I'm not safe. And they may have never hit you. Nothing like that ever happened. You still feel unsafe. You still saw your dad hit your mom, or vice versa, which creates this fight, flight, or freeze response inside of a kid. When that gets heightened and nobody turns that off, we deal with, that's basically PTSD. That's why you have certain things. So yeah, your parents' relationship with each other plays a huge role. Maybe not always in classic attachment, but we know it's massive in how a kid relates to others, how he relates to himself, his understanding, again, of ethics, of and morality, of relational, how do you work through communication patterns? Do you punch your way through things, or do you actually sit down and talk about it? Parents whose kids never argued with them in person have a huge problem, because being in marriage is like, I never saw my parents argue. I don't know what that looks like. Then they have this inner rage monster come out, and they go, whoa, where'd that come from? My parents never did that. Now I'm a failure. Now I feel a lot of shame, right? Parents should have an appropriate level of communication in front of their kids, not knockdown, drag out fights, not screaming, but showing them how it's done. That should be modeled. So the fact that certain things aren't modeled, that's where reparenting can also come in, is you go back and model for yourself what that should have looked like. Does that answer that?
Yeah.
Kind of, I know. Sorry, go ahead and clarify one more time, like if you have other questions, because I want to get to the bottom of that.
I guess, do we have an understanding of what is more important, parent-to-child relationship or parent-to-parent relationship, as it pertains to the child's growing up?
I don't know that we have I would think parent-to-child, because it's dealing with the ego and the self more than the others. One is what's modeled and one is what's actually done to you. So I would think That's my theory, or that's my understanding of it. That would deal more with it. But we also, again, I work with plenty where nothing happened to them, but they saw multiple things. Even family systems is another big one. I've got a couple clients right now who it happened to their siblings. Nothing happened to them, but something happened to their siblings that was really bad that they knew about, and it wasn't processed appropriately. And then you get into survivor's guilt, right? Like, why didn't it happen to me? Whatever it is. I got to compensate. I got one whose weight issue as well. Her sister was really overweight. She was the one that was just lambasted by the parents. So those systems come into play as well. Nothing ever happened to her, but to say it doesn't, to rank them is really difficult. It kind of depends on each client. That's what I'd say.
Would it be safe to say that the biblical model of, how many times God talks about how the spouses are supposed to interact, and that the marriage is supposed to mirror Christ with the church, that is going to have a trickle down effect, and to proper attachment, to proper love, to proper giving them the proper example. I think the more that you have a marriage relationship that mirrors what God intended, I think the more secure children you're going to have. Is that a fair?
So that's the beauty of all of this, which we'll get into some tomorrow, but that's the beauty of the way Christ created it, or the way God created it, with Christ and the church, with even the church in the sense of community we're supposed to have. He built in all of the things we understand and we try to mimic and replicate in therapy. God built in naturally if people are doing what they're supposed to. That speaks amazingly to God, because the therapy world wants to act like, well, where's God in these situations? It's like, if we were doing what we were supposed to, we wouldn't have these issues. I wouldn't be up here talking about attachment if we actually had the appropriate levels of attachment that Ephesians 5 talks about, Ephesians 6 with the parents, right? Parent to child. And then the church, what we see in Acts 2 is 42 and following, is a church that's devoted to one another and that would heal each other's emotional wounds as well, because they're sharing, having all things in common. Somebody loses their house and somebody else comes and gives them their house. Like, that's how you help one another. We don't have that, and so once again they come to see me. That shouldn't happen. In God's perfect plan, we wouldn't need therapy. Unfortunately, we live in a fallen world, and so I think we do, because it helps us with some of this stuff. And we're going to break down some of the ideas surrounding loving yourself, because that's where we don't therapy world kind of does this, it seems, with the gospel. When it's done right, it should do this. It should really interconnect. But that's a really good thought. Any other questions or thoughts on this?
I don't know if you're going to go into this, but are you going to go into like a practical application of how to start the process of opening up with our children and saying, do you feel like you are not able to speak how you're feeling, like that you're not able to share what you're going through? Like, how can we facilitate an environment and an openness with our children so that they feel like it's okay, even if I have something on my heart or in my mind that I know is difficult or uncomfortable, that they could still feel like our family's open, we're honest,
Sure.
We can sit down, we can talk. Are you going to go into practical applications on how to make that happen?
Not from a family systems perspective. I suppose I could. I'm not done finishing my fifth talk, so maybe I will. Not from a family systems perspective. What I will say is there has to be a lot of modeling in there. Telling or asking them or saying, hey, can you tell me, what's going on or whatever else. If you have not built a system in place where they trust that, then they go, no, I'm good, thanks. Everything's fine. If you model for them you doing that, and you share with them some things, and they see you and your spouse sharing, and it creates this sense in this house that we share things with one another because we care. And then you are there time and time and time again. And when they share things, you always show up, and you create that positive attachment. Then they begin to trust it. If we try to get our kids to understand, like, it is a safe, you can tell me. It's like, whoa, no. And I tried that last time, right? And you blew up. Whatever it is, something like that. The kid goes, I don't trust it. And so there's this barrier. If you model for them that you are somebody worthy of being trusted because you trust your spouse because of all this, then the kid sees a healthily functioning home where they feel that I can know and be known, right? But if they don't know because we don't open up our problems and we want to know them, no. There's a two-way street. We have to model for our kids what we want. So it's a basic understanding. I can put something in there like that if you want, or we can go over that some. You're my mother-in-law, so I can go over it with you anytime. But yes, for that, I think it's family systems is very difficult because there's a lot of rules. You have to break down the rules in the system and say, why is the rule in place that we don't talk about these things? Then you're open and honest with the family and say, I think we call out the rules in the family, we break down the rules with everybody sitting there, and we call it out, and then we allow everybody to kind of share as to why that's a rule in the first place. Maybe it's a really good rule, and maybe that needs to be in place, and maybe it's not. And so if there's a rule in place that we don't talk about grief and loss, that's a family rule. You learn to operate within the family structure. If we call it out and we say, guys, I've realized that we don't talk about grief and loss in this family. Does everybody feel that? Yeah, everybody feels that. Why do you think that is? I don't know. I think that's something we probably need to change. Let's talk about why that is, why that system or why that rule is in place, and maybe see if the kids can put some input as to how we might begin to change that rule. So that's another, if the kids are old enough, obviously, which your family would be. So, something like that can really help as well. And you change some of the family operating rules. That's a brief understanding. Does that make sense? Questions? Any other questions or thoughts?
I just wonder if I can get through this. I was the child in the family that saw the abuse. And of course it wasn't handled at all. And then it caused lots of problems with me. But I was lucky enough that I had a real good relationship with my grandmother, who, even though our family were always in church, there were just lots of problems with dysfunctionality and abuse and all kinds of things like that. But the good thing is that I really, as I aged, I developed a really great relationship with God. So you need to know that I can't fix my family. I couldn't do anything with them, but I could fix me. So there's been some therapy, lots of reading, lots of talking, lots of taking control so that I could function.
Yeah.
And but it was all because of God.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. That's what this is all about. Is God is the consistent presence in our life that is always loving, always caring. We're going to look at that in the keynote that I have on Saturday of God healing us in our brokenness, right, in the darkest places, and Him finding us and Him caring for us and healing us when we don't feel deserving of being healed. And Him always, He never gives up on us. And so that's what all this is about. I will say, as you maybe think about it, slight tangent, but if you struggle with your relationship with God, think about your relationship with your dad and whether you feel close to your dad or not. Most of the time with people that struggle to understand or to connect with God in their prayer lives or whatever else, I say, what's your relationship like with your father? Well, it's horrible. Well, there you go. Process through that, and then you can have a better understanding because God is the perfect father. Ours may not have been. We can logically understand it, but we got to sometimes work through that. So good for you for working through it, but also coming to the realization that God is there to heal us and to care for us and comfort and to love us through the very worst things imaginable. So, man, I'm really sorry you went through that, but glad you're doing this. Thank you for sharing. Any other questions or thoughts? We're right at 5. Last one. Last call. Thanks, guys. We're going to pick up tomorrow with identity and